War is often remembered through battles, strategies, and decisive victories, but much of the human experience in conflict is measured in smaller, less celebrated details. One of these overlooked realities is the simple leather boot. Soldiers across the globe depended on their boots not just for mobility, but for survival. A poorly treated pair could mean frostbite, trench foot, or the inability to march at all. Yet what many histories gloss over is how soldiers learned, often through trial and error, methods for treating and preserving leather in conditions that would destroy ordinary footwear. These treatments, refined in the crucible of World War II, are not relics. They remain effective today for anyone facing extreme cold, wet, or mud-saturated conditions. Leather fails quickly if it isn't kept flexible and dry, especially in sub-zero environments. Military history records thousands of cases of entire companies slowed or immobilized by waterlogged boots. In the Eastern Front, German soldiers marching into the Soviet winter faced temperatures far below freezing. Leather soaked with snow or sleet stiffened and cracked, turning what was supposed to be a protective covering into a hazard. Similarly, British and American troops in Italy or the Ardennes reported boots that soaked through in hours, often because soldiers underestimated the importance of routine maintenance in wet conditions. These failures were rarely caused by defective boots, but by improper treatment and a lack of knowledge about leather's physical limitations. Oiling leather was not a uniform practice, yet it actually saved thousands of soldiers from injury. One of the most common methods developed during the war was applying oil to maintain flexibility. Soldiers experimented with natural fats, such as mink oil or neatsfoot oil, which penetrated leather and prevented water from saturating the fibers. Applied lightly and evenly, oil prevented leather from stiffening in the cold and allowed boots to retain grip on ice or snow. However, over-application could weaken seams or attract dirt, demonstrating the delicate balance required. Manuals from both German and American armies emphasized that oiling had to be paired with careful drying. Boots left to sit in an oily, wet state would deteriorate faster than untreated leather. Drying leather required patience, but improvisation kept troops moving. Field conditions rarely permitted ideal drying environments, yet soldiers developed methods that exploited available resources. In the Pacific Theater, American troops used warm rocks near campfires to slowly dry jungle-soaked boots, while avoiding direct flames that could scorch leather. In Russia, German soldiers, would often stuff their boots with straw to absorb moisture and help maintain the shape overnight. These seemingly small actions actually prevented the leather from shrinking, cracking, or losing its structural integrity, a really critical factor when infantry depended on their footwear for those long forced marches. Waxing boots was another critical adaptation, especially in wet or icy conditions. Wax coatings, applied sparingly, served as a barrier against water. British soldiers in North Africa, for example, combined natural beeswax with tallow to create a paste that could be rubbed into boots before patrols. This treatment repelled light rain or snow and created a sort of semi-rigid surface that resisted punctures and abrasions. Importantly, waxing required follow-up care. Repeated exposure to moisture meant you had to reapply, or the leather would dry internally and crack. Historical records actually note that units who disciplined soldiers to maintain waxed boots experienced fewer cold weather injuries and, managed to maintain operational mobility in those wet campaigns. Polishing boots was more than just about appearances. It was actually protective. Fine-grained, wax-based polishes would smooth out leather surfaces, closing up those tiny micro-fissures that could let water sneak in. Plus, polished boots could reflect sunlight, which helped slow down freeze damage, especially in places where ice formation on leather was, a constant threat. Soldiers were told to polish their boots regularly, not only to keep up uniform standards, but, honestly, because boots that were neglected were far more likely to fail in wet or icy conditions. Boots could actually be hardened in a strategic way for icy conditions, and this could be done without causing them to crack. Soldiers in snowy regions would often apply a light layer of oil, then briefly expose the boots to cold and give them a firm shaping. This process, allowed boots to maintain their form even under frozen conditions, while still keeping enough flexibility so that soldiers could walk. Field diaries from both Soviet and German units actually report that treatments like these reduced incidents of leather splitting along the toe or heel, especially during those forced marches across frozen rivers or through snow-laden forests. Improvised waterproofing with local materials, well, it really saved lives in those extreme conditions. When standard treatments just weren't available, soldiers had to rely on their own ingenuity. For example, in North Africa, British units dipped their boots in paraffin wax when natural oils ran out. On the Eastern Front, some troops would coat their leather boots with thin layers of pine resin or even vehicle grease to help repel water. These improvisations were risky. Too much resin could actually make the boots rigid. But in emergencies, they prevented the much more immediate danger of frostbite or trench foot. These experiences honestly demonstrate a broader principle. Survival in war was often determined by adaptability and a practical understanding of materials, rather than by simply having superior equipment. Perhaps the most significant insight from these boot treatments was that routine care was as strategic as any weapon. Armies that trained soldiers to maintain footwear regularly, oiling weekly, drying nightly, polishing on return from patrol, experienced far fewer cold weather injuries. Conversely, units that neglected this care saw operational capability degrade quickly. The simple act of leather maintenance influenced not only individual survival but unit effectiveness, and lessons learned during World War II informed post-war military doctrine, emphasizing preventive care for soldiers' gear as integral to readiness. The lessons from World War II leather boot treatments are timeless for survivalists today. The effectiveness of oiling, drying, waxing, polishing, hardening, and improvised waterproofing illustrates a fundamental principle: knowledge of materials, environmental conditions, and disciplined maintenance can outweigh even superior technology. Modern survival gear may rely on synthetics, but leather still remains relevant in so many contexts, from historical reenactments to extreme cold weather expeditions. Applying these historically validated methods can actually prevent injuries, prolong the life of your footwear, and, enhance mobility in harsh conditions. What these stories reveal is the continuity of human ingenuity. Soldiers confronted with relentless environmental hazards developed practical solutions that remain valid even decades later. Understanding these lesser-known aspects of wartime survival enriches our grasp of history. It reminds us that battles are not only fought with guns or strategy, but with patience, attention to detail, and mastery over the ordinary materials that soldiers relied on daily. Remembering such knowledge honors the experience of those who endured extreme conditions and ensures that valuable lessons of endurance, resourcefulness, and discipline are not lost to time. If you value in-depth exploration of the overlooked and essential aspects of history, subscribe to Iron Age Instincts and, share this video. These are the stories that deepen our understanding of human resilience and the true complexity of conflict.